start our discussion by a quote or by some experience that someone has sent us. One fine morning in 2016, I was seated at the English department's computer, attending to my work. A senior academic of the department entered and after a while observed broken pieces of an old computer piled up next to me. They were layered with dust. There is dust everywhere, and then there is human dust, they said. We are starting our discussion with this experience. But we are going to a land where no academic has gone before, I guess. We are talking about the first generation students in English departments and how they try with varying degrees to navigate an exclusive and exceptional cultural, social, economic space that they are in. We have with us Anindita Ghosh today, who has very generously agreed to talk to us about this. Anindita is an assistant professor. She teaches literature at the Department of English, Maitri College, University of Delhi. Hi Anindita, it's such a pleasure and such a privilege to have you today with us.
Thanks, Tilna. It's that's a generous introduction, and the quote was actually something that that evoked an imagery in our head, something that we both have been taught as a part of our English, as a part of English department to think of, right? So yeah, thanks for the invitation. Thanks for your generous introduction, and yeah, it's this is something that that really makes sense, something that we really need to, the topic is something that we really need to talk about, as we think of humanity and the crises of humanities. Perhaps this is also one of the things that we really need to think of, that what happens to the first generation students, from departments like English literature, when they are transitioning to higher education. What are their troubles? What kind of dilemmas and traumas and discomforts do they face? So yeah, it's a big thanks to you for actually considering to make it a part of your series.
Thank you.
So yeah,
Thank you,
thanks
Anindita.
a lot.
Yeah, and it wouldn't have been, it wouldn't have come to fruition if had you not agreed to do this. And I think it's the being first generation or being first generation literature student specifically um, has a lot of implications, has a lot of social, economic, cultural, and political implications. And it's not easy. And this is something that, like both of us said, that is not being taught. Like what kind of psychological, emotional trauma these students have to go through just because they have to navigate two value systems. One at the Department of English, which is like very exclusive, and the other at home, which they feel they no longer belong to. So Anindita is here today, and we are going to talk about some of the aspects of how students have been trying to come out and talk about this. Anindita will move on to our discussion, talking about specifically in your context, how would the students who are first generation literature students, how would they navigate this English department space, especially when it comes to elite universities or metropolitan universities or urban universities? What happens to these students who do not have access to English as their first language at their home?
Yeah, I mean, when we think of these students, and these elite universities and metropolitan universities in urban settings, we see a lot many students transitioning from semi-urban settings, from schools which do not from schools which do not teach in English, or many students from schools where they are taught in vernacular languages, where English is introduced only at higher secondary level. Okay, so
Yeah.
people these students coming from these language belts where English is barely spoken, or their accent, or they lack the right accent, they lack the right kind of vocabulary. So all of it in fact becomes a site of mockery for them. Mockery for them. They are very often seen as less, quote unquote, less in their classes. However, that is only when they manage to get into this elite universities or elite departments. And I have heard accounts of how students suffered throughout their course duration, because they could not follow the teacher and the lectures in the class. And I mean, we will come to the discussion about how the teachers reciprocate to it. But many students have actually complained that how because they had their schooling from schools, or from educational boards, which where the medium of teaching is a vernacular language and English is introduced later. They find themselves quite at loss. So in fact, English as a medium of language, or English medium education, becomes the norm for English honors. So at these departments, so one wonders what happens to the brilliant ideas that occurs to the people who are not not from the English medium schools. Okay, so this in fact this prominence that is given to the language over thought, and some have even you know and in fact some of the some of the people I got to share my experience and their experience with. Some of them in fact branded this as some kind of colonial hangover. Okay, so many teachers also they said that how many teachers have humiliated such students, or they were themselves a subject of such humiliation, where their thoughts were not given prominence. The language or the grammar or the accent that they speak was given prominence. I mean, so much for being a democratic space that that this the English department or the English discipline claims to be. Unless you speak in good grammar or rich vocabulary, you will not be heard. Okay, so there's a lot of silencing. So many students complain about the lack of in fact some of these some of the students who have the cultural capital, they often complain about the how their fellow classmates lack the skills of Shakespearean English culture. Okay, of course it is meant as an attack. It's meant as an attack on their fellow classmates. So some of these students are from state boards where vernacular language is given preference. In fact, it seems there's an invisible hierarchy between students, and and this hierarchy is this hierarchy is sanctioned, or sanctioned by the teachers. So this hierarchy between students who came from which board, or which what was their medium of education. So say one of the popular things that popular hierarchization that one would see is when you enter the first year class, many of these students would be asking each other if they're from CBSE board or ICSE board. So CBSE is the Central Board of Secondary Education. It is supposed to be more widely affiliated to by school bodies across India, as opposed to ICSE board, which is Indian Certificate of Secondary Education. Both of them offer 12 years of education. It's just that CBSE is CBSE is wide more popular and widely accepted by schools for affiliation, and ICSE is assumed to be more quote unquote refined and difficult board exam, with more difficult syllabus. So that is where so many students engage in that engage in that kind of hierarchization also. where in the first year class, the first 2-3 week, everyone is asking each other, which board are you from, and and some of them are boasting about how things are going to be easy for them in this department because they have access to access to because they have studied at studied a syllabus which was more rigorous and enriched. So apparently so the hierarchies of the of elitism just doesn't stop. Okay, in fact the dual modes of education, which is like the private and the public schooling, contributes to it largely. The private mode of schooling is equal to better quality of education, where student gets more attention, or has access to libraries, or student counseling, or social capital, or guidance, or or more co-curricular activities, more more time more time in school to experience not just textual knowledge but then non-textual knowledge also. Okay. As opposed to that, of course, the public mode of schooling is largely very poor and a very poor version of all of the factors that we talk about in in private education, right? In fact, someone told me that how they have felt the discrimination in class, where and they were discussing that how no one would how no one would tell them how to approach literary studies, because if you are from if you are from a certain kind of schooling, it's you have you have been pre-trained for this discipline, as opposed to that some students who are from, say, public mode of schooling weren't trained so rigorously. So there have been some of the people that I spoke to, they had they had complaints about how they have been they feel discriminated in class. There is a assumption that they know it all, so no one would tell them how to approach literary studies or literary terms and theorists, or or how in the class these theorists and literary terms would be dropped rampantly, often without explanation by the teacher. It is assumed by the teacher how the student must know it all. Okay. So and if the student does not know the same terms, and the same theorists are dropped to highlight their incompetency by the teacher. So this the whole latecomers, the concept of the latecomers to literature, as if one may want to call them. So often these latecomers to literary studies, they often face hostility because they were not encouraged as children or as teenager by their families or by their schools or by their social conditions, social context. Okay. I mean, coming back to what we were talking about, the students from non-English medium background. So what primarily happens to them is that many of these colleges and universities have entrance tests, entrance tests, and these are qualifying exams. Okay. So you get an admission. Doesn't matter what is your board marks, or how much have you scored in your 12th exam, or how much have you scored in your graduation exam. If you're moving from school to college to post graduation to PhD or MPhil, whatever it be. Right. These entrance tests, these entrance tests often serve as as a as a way of eliminating them out of the out of the race. Okay. Absolutely. So how these qualifying exams, of course, most of them cannot crack it. So various kinds of silencing is at work when we look at look at it, and it's almost it's almost outrageous to see, because when we look at these entrance exams, and the fun part is when when many of these universities or colleges started scraping off these entrance exams, they started removing the entrance exam and marks, and as in, it was based on the marks that you have scored. Many teachers, many teachers from the English department saw this as a degradation of the quality of students, now they would receive. Okay, so they would in fact mock at these students and call them the non-bibliophiles, or the Chetan Bhagat readers of Chetan Bhagat readers, or not reading, and not acknowledge the fact that not reading beyond the school books is very common in in non-elite Indian families. This someone I know even informed me how her parents took away her literature collection during her school board exam, as it was seen as a distraction for her. Okay, and they wanted her to fare well, and how education is a means of social and financial mobility, so her parents wanted her to stay away from literature so that it does not distract her and she fares well in exam. Okay, so coming from such a culture or cultural background, it is difficult for the first time English honor students. The ecosystem has its own rules, and such students are never told about these rules. Your lack of exposure is held against you. Your lack of not knowing how the economy, how this ecosystem works is not never told to you, and not knowing what is good literature or bad literature, or consuming literature without much classification or criticism is not seen well. Okay. In fact, another friend pointed out how she was mocked at for reading many contemporary Indian literature authors, because they are like, they're too popular, but then when she joined her masters at one of these elite universities, she was made to read equally dubious texts of English literature from from the West and from 2 centuries ago. She was talking about Pamela. Okay, so she was talking about how how reading Indian English authors, of contemporary Indian English authors, were looked down, but reading almost a street literature from 2 centuries ago, but English literature from West, English literature from England, was a part of her syllabus. So she was quite puzzled by the binary, by the oppositions. The text, she had to in fact read that text, and she was stunned to see how English literature from the West was canonized and was seen as the standard literature, and as the as the preferred literature in English departments. Okay, forgetting that that we are that these English departments are in post-colonial locations, post-colonial contexts. Okay. In fact, her knowledge of other literature, or she in fact she told me how she has read more from two vernacular languages that she speaks, and her her comfortably long reading list was discredited just because they were not English. So the importance given to the English language and English literature of the West is is preposterous almost. I mean, no wonder many students come to the course with aspirations like it will help them in social climbing, or it will help them develop a personality, or it will help them improve their English. Okay. I mean, given the amount of Anglophilia that's been projected, it's very obvious that an outsider would see the department or the course as that. You know how it can be used to used to develop personality, or or to improve their English. In fact, I mean it's a common it's a common thing where people have people tell people told me that how their family members couldn't make sense of the fact that why would they move cities to just study English literature, or why or why, or a relative has asked why has she moved why would she go so far away from home, or why would she spend, she's a bright student, why is she going to study English literature? I mean, and they don't even, many people have assumptions about English literature that, oh, you must be you students from English literature, you must be writing summaries, or or some of them assume that it's we are just reading novels after novels sitting at home. And so it's there's also a gap in how the department perceives itself, the students, like the members, the students, faculty members, researchers of the department perceives themselves, and
Right.
how others perceive them. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
The
So,
ability to, in
yeah.
fact, yeah,
Yes, I mean,
the
yeah, go
ability
ahead. Yeah.
there's this kind of ability, the kind of ability to resound the values and the critical mindset that the course inculcates, and to employ it in our in our daily life is also a matter of privilege, for that matter. And many people seem to miss this out, that that the course tends, that some of us, some of the people may not be able to engage in such critical mindset on a regular day to day basis, and how how to radically espouse those ideas also requires a lot of privilege. And as many of them in fact had to struggle, in fact, I mean, talking about people who had to struggle against their families to pursue the course, as they just because they enjoy literature and they thought that they want to do it, right? So
Right.
many of them struggle to pursue the course, convince their parents that can they join the course after they are done with school. So the elitism in fact disappoints them a lot, when they reach the department after having convinced their family. And in fact they many of them feel very abandoned at both the doors. The families do not appreciate their educational choices, and the
Right.
departments do not appreciate their lesser known presence. Okay.
Right.
So many of them indulge in therefore absenteeism. Okay. Many of them start dropping out, or or wait for the course to get over so that they can change their career trajectories. Okay. Some of them who manage to fight the odds, they have their own struggles, of course. The performance of the performance of cultural capital. Okay. The
Absolutely.
knowledge that mentioning certain literary terms or names in class has their own cultural value and is widely used. Okay.
Yeah.
Like you
Yeah.
go to a literature class, sometimes students are just just using certain certain names, certain literary terms, just because of the aesthetic values that it adds. Okay. And yes, it works. Okay. So often clothing also, clothing, lifestyle, how there are many who are trying to fit in, and they're trying to fit in through changing their clothing, their lifestyle. All of it becomes a part of the performance of trying to belong to a English department. And some people I spoke to, they told me that they did not know that the classrooms was spaces where where students debate with teachers, or that students can debate with teachers. It came as a shock to them. In a the first month of the course, and it's just out of freshly out of school, in a your first month of the course in college. And they it was quite jarring for them to know that, okay, so they can argue, they can debate openly with the teacher, and it's something that they're allowed to do. So I mean,
Yes.
even the knowledge of how to function, or how to how to function in a class was also lacking to them. Okay.
Absolutely right. Now, like, if sorry to interrupt you, like, even to debate, even to have this conversation with our teachers, about,
mm,
to contradict their ideas, have this kind of academic conversation. I think one of the things that is necessary is the cultural capital, and the first generation students of these non-anglicized, students coming from rural backgrounds do not have this kind of capital, right? And they just
yeah.
become silent in the class, and that silence is interpreted as this person is not smart, and this person has not
Yeah.
read the text, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. In fact, so many of them, so bright but unaware of the, paratextual nature of the discipline, the paratextual nature of, oh, can I debate in the class with my teacher? So many of them are so bright and unaware that, that we can actually, that the paratextual nature of the of the discipline, nor are they introduced or oriented towards it by the teacher.
Uh-huh.
And a certain section of the class therefore stands to gain from it,
Mhm.
as the teacher fails to do so, fails to introduce the whole class that there are certain paratextual things that makes makes the class the way it is. Another person I was talking to
Mhm.
um, told me about how his family member is from a vernacular literature department.
Mhm.
So vernacular is vernacular literature, not English literature, one of the Indian vernacular literature department. So he was saying that how his family member is from this vernacular literature department, and so did not possess the cultural snobbery, so the cultural snobbery which one usually attaches to the English department. Okay, so
Right.
he actually it actually put me thinking that so the is the cultural snobbery very specific to English literature departments only? Because if a vernacular literature department, because literature is literature, right? So if
Mhm.
vernacular literature departments do not carry the cultural snobbery and English literature departments do, so one begins to question that how what is it, what is it that brings the cultural snobbery.
Mhm.
Many students of English literature of these elite universities in fact complain
Okay.
how they feel less for not knowing the cultural references made by the teachers in class.
Uh-huh.
How the teacher may make a reference to uh, a western or a western or a western music or classical music or a pop culture or a classical mythology
Yeah.
or a literary jargon,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
all of this adds to their discomfort. A friend
Mhm.
in fact was telling me that how her lack of knowledge about a certain prominent English author who writes children literature,
Mhm.
and assumed to be, and everyone assumes that as if everyone has read
Right.
that prominent English author,
Okay.
and her books.
Mhm.
She was mocked at in one of her classes, in one of
Mhm.
her students, in one of her gatherings. She was a student then. Whereas her research is on children's literature today.
Right.
So the kind of distancing in the classroom for these students also come from how the teachers usually conduct themselves in the classes. The
Mhm.
teachers appear to be almost inaccessible to them, to these
Okay.
students.
Okay.
Someone open, inaccessible in terms of someone open to listening only higher theories. Okay.
Mhm.
In fact, the performance of the performance of the teacher and their pedagogy is equally troublesome. The
Absolutely.
teacher
Mhm.
presents himself or herself as on some pedestal with aura, with some aura, and and is expected to be expected to be of a certain kind. So what he or she says, the words, the sentences are relatable, but
Mhm.
the presence, the performance, the speech act is not relatable. So the student listens to the teacher
Mhm.
speak,
Mhm.
and every word is understandable to them because, well, it's plain English. But the way it's presented, the way it's often sprinkled with with theory and jargon and names,
Yeah.
literary terms.
Mhm.
The whole the speech is understandable to these students, but the speech act, the
Mhm.
act around that speech, it's not relatable to them. Another friend who has done some significant work on how English, how English syllabus making and pedagogy, and how these departments work.
Mhm.
He in fact goes on to mention certain documented students accounts of how to be a part, that how some students complain that they just don't know
Okay.
that they are here in the department, and they're a part of the department. They're here all willing, all ready to work, all ready to put the hours required, but they
Right.
just don't know how to be a part of these literary coteries,
Absolutely.
how to become become a part of these English literary societies, you know. In fact, finally he also added that, you know, how most of these students feel excluded when it comes to the act of reading also, or, you know, the act of reading and writing in class, you know. Many of these, many being the first, you know, first generation English literature students from their, you know, from their familial or social locale, who have landed here, do not know how to read or write in these, you know, being in this department. The teachers evaluate based on whether, you know, the teachers, you know, instead of teaching them the, you know, the styles and techniques and language and writing, and writing, you know, these teachers also often land up evaluating them based on whether you already know how to write or read, read a text in the, in an English literature department. So we all know that, you know, the in an English literature department, literature is not read the way, you know, literature is read. You know, we don't read literature, we study literature. So the literary criticism, using theory, how to apply the theory, you know, how to interpret, you know, how to study against, study against the gray, grain, or, you know, how to, how to read between the lines, you know. So all these interpretation, critical thinking, analysis, you know, historical contextualization, none of this is introduced initially, you know, none of this is introduced. So many of, many of these people, students complain that they had to figure it out on their own, and if they couldn't figure it out, well, you know, they're on their own. So it is not introduced to these students, you know. Many of these students therefore resort to, you know, the cheap guidebooks, and which again is, looked down upon by the teachers, you know, who did not, you know. So so the teachers would look down upon you, for not knowing these. They will not teach you, they will judge you for not knowing, for resorting to guidebooks. And so, you know, so it's like a, you know, it's like a no-win situation for them, you know. They, if they, you know, if they are not taught the techniques of surviving in the department, they would resort to guidebooks. Guidebooks are the things that the teachers would look down upon, you know, or penalize them for writing answers from these. Penalize them for writing answers from these guidebooks, you know. Or, and whereas these are the teachers who should have, taught them, or introduced them to the specific ways of language, right, language used, or style used, or writing and techniques used within the department. So with, of course, there are these, these tutorials or remedial classes, or, feedback system, or, assistance provided in several of these elite spaces. Some of these some of these colleges and universities have come up with, guidance classes, so that when students come from, when students are, taking the entrance test, they are trained before they take these entrance tests. Some of these colleges have decided to introduce, introduce academic, academic writing workshops, so that, when these students come in, they are oriented into it. But, a lot of it is largely ineffective and tokenistic in nature, because because you cannot just, fill in the gap by just, clogging it with a workshop, or 1 month coaching, coaching class. Okay. Not to forget how the schooling system that does not prepare these students for, liberal arts at all. Okay. The schooling system is like a, gaping wound that never prepares, students for liberal arts. It's quite difficult for, therefore, such students to, in fact, survive, survive in the, survive in the system or in the departments. And no wonder many of them leave the department, as the discipline does not seem promising, seem to promise them jobs or worthy jobs or career, or financially, financially fulfilling, careers. Okay. Which is not the case.
Amita, I'd like to stop you there. Like, I want to ask you something like this before we move on to the jobs and the careers, and their future prospects. Now, there are different ways that first generation students try to navigate the system. And one of the ways is, like you rightly said, is trying to fit into the system. Like trying to particularly in their dress, particularly in their lifestyle, particularly probably cultivating an accent, etc., etc. So imagine, like, if they get to come to a position, through their hard work, through their determination. Sometimes, isn't there a tendency that these first generation students will also become gatekeepers, like, of this particular standards, norms of the department? Have you come across any experience like that, or is it just
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, let's not forget how the oppressed turns into a oppressor. Okay, let's not forget that. It's a very common thing where the people who feel themselves to be left outside the gate, once they get an entry, they become the gatekeepers themselves. In fact, they become more staunch gatekeepers than others. Because it's also how it's also like it's like a it's like an economy. It's like an economy where once you have access to it, you don't want everyone else to have an access to it, because the moment everyone else has access to it, you dilute it. And so all the hard work that you have put in goes to waste. Of course, it's a very selfish approach. But then I mean, it's a very selfish approach. Well, I don't know if selfish is the right word, but then yeah, it's a very twisted approach. Where some of them fall back in the same hierarchies, and they ensure that the hierarchy stays, and
Yeah.
they don't try to dilute it. But then I don't but then it's also it's also but then it's also problematic in
Right.
how it's also problematic in asking them alone to deconstruct it.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
because
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
of course, it's a classic oppressed turn oppressor syndrome. Okay, it's a classic oppressed turn oppressor syndrome. No wonder, they are outside the gate. Once they get in, they become the gatekeeper. No doubt. Okay, but then to just expect that instead of just questioning the gatekeepers, instead of just questioning, why did you now that once you're into the system, why did you become gatekeeper?
Right.
Let's
Yeah.
question the system itself. That
Absolutely.
why does the system expect us to be expect us to be the way to be this way, right?
Right. Right.
Why for in order for a first generation English literature student to survive in the department somehow, who has made it to the top, why would he or she will also have to turn his face around, or from people who were like him, like him, right? Or like her, right? These questions, of course, but then it's all of this requires a macro change, or long term change, simply by questioning the single individual, and why did you betray your community. It does not change the system, because at best he or she turns into a gatekeeper. Still, the person is never at the zenith, or at the center of the system, because that's how the system works. It works by inclusion.
Yeah.
It will include some people in, so that so that the system stays intact. So the system is questioned critically, and if at all it's questioned critically, there are always going to be these newly minted oppressor from who were erstwhile oppressed. So
Right.
they will always be there to speak for them. So it's also like a very heinous system that that advantages a lot by
Yeah. Yeah.
turning these oppressed into oppressors. So I don't know how much should one be questioning them alone. I mean,
Yeah.
of course,
Absolutely. Yeah.
their actions are not laudable. their actions are not laudable at all. But then, asking,
That,
just
yeah,
holding them
that's just the way that
accountable.
they, yeah, that's just the way that they navigate the system, maybe, like,
Mhm.
yeah, probably, I've heard a lot of experience, especially in the Sri Lankan context, where people navigate the system in different ways. Sometimes
Mhm.
they resist the system, but that resistance is not counted as resistance. Like, say for example, we just act very humble, act very grateful, act very obliging. At the
Also,
same time, yeah.
with the English department, how, if you are resisting the system, your resistance is also valorized. So, like, say, it's like, you will speak against the system, and the same system will incorporate it and say, look, she spoke, okay. So, it's like, even if you're rebelling, they have a very nice way of incorporating your rebellion, and instead of making you, so instead of making you an outcast, they can very easily make you a hero,
Hero.
just for the sake of, stripping you of your, of your rebellion, or stripping you of the rebellious cause that you were working towards. So, your rebellion will be suddenly glorified. Oh, look at her, she's so rebellious, okay. I mean, why don't you look at the rebellion, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Anindita, there's another issue that I would like to talk, especially when it comes to approachability of the academic staff of the department. Usually we see, most of the time, at least I can speak the context of Sri Lanka. Most of the time, the academics tend to be very distant and very cold sometimes. Especially like the students, the first generation students would think, okay, this is my fault because I'm not smart enough, and this tension builds up, especially when it comes to them finding a supervisor for their thesis if they are doing an honors degree, right? So then their connection with the supervisor is tensed up. So it's kind of like it gets very really toxic. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I think, this. I mean, this the supervisee and supervisor relationship turning into toxic, and the first generation English literature student not knowing how to work in this economy is
Mm,
very common. It's not
mm,
something unheard of
mm.
in Indian context too.
Okay.
Okay, many students do not know how to approach a supervisor. Many
Mm,
students do not know what will make the supervisor happy.
mm,
Sometimes the supervisor, because of all the reasons that we were discussing,
yeah.
sometimes the supervisor already has certain prejudices towards the supervisee,
Okay.
and the supervisor assumes that, oh, he or she is like this, okay.
Okay.
So there comes, the toxicity, or the resistance, or the the impossibility of reaching a healthy supervisor relationship, or healthy supervision,
Mm-hmm.
becomes very difficult.
Mm,
Students just can't function. Students just don't know what are the ways of functioning. You would see
absolutely.
that, some students have it so easy. The supervisors love them. The supervisors love them, the students love the supervisor, they're hanging out together, they're going, they're going to plays, they're going to watch, plays, or performances, they're catching up at each other's place, or
Mm,
for a book reading session, or
yeah.
they're going for a premiere of a fancy movie. So
Yeah.
some of them have it so easy, right?
Mm,
And
mm,
one wonders, where does this ease come from, right?
mm, mm, mm,
This ease again is a part of this whole structure, where just
mm,
some people just know how to function, how to survive in this system, because of their cultural capital. They're always seen as acceptable, as a part of the as a part of the academic, English literature academic space. They're seen as a
mm,
part, and believe me, nothing works more for you than being seen as a part of a system.
absolutely.
Nothing
Yeah.
works more than that. I mean, in fact, I was thinking of it in terms of how it works. Works in, I think we talked about it as well, right? In one of our
Mm,
discussions before
mm,
this recording, we were talking
yeah.
about the LOR system, right? That
Mm,
how some students just don't know that how the LOR system works, that they can write, they can seek letter of recommendation. A teacher is supposed to write letter of recommendation for everyone unless he or she has a specific particular reason not to write. Okay. So the LOR system is also equally seen as this this exclusionary world, where some students are so nonchalant. They would walk up to a teacher after a class, have a conversation, slip in the fact that I will be looking for a LOR from you next year when I apply to XYZ university. And some students don't know how to how to do so. They just can't figure it out. Like, should I ask? Am I worthy enough? Why would the teacher write a LOR for me? Would he or she write a good LOR for me? So so most of them don't even know how to reach out to a teacher for an LOR. Or the fact that everyone should every student has the right to an LOR. Or that or it's also about, it's very similar to this whole supervisor supervisee relation, right? To know that what to know, just to know things by just didn't seen as someone who belongs to this space, to be seen as someone who belongs. And the moment you're seen as someone who belongs, and you speak the language, you speak the vocabulary, you speak the diction, you behave you behave in a way which is acceptable, which is seen as as their kind, things become easy for you. And that's where the first generation students fall back, right? They don't know what is the what is the lingo, they don't know what is the what is this what are they supposed to do, or how are they supposed to approach things.
Right.
So
Yeah. And yeah, and like with this, I guess like most departments judge your intellect, whether you are a smart person, whether whether you're quite well read, from the fact that like majorly from imposing a particular standard of writing. That is what is my experience, at least. Having a standard of writing, and this standard is maintained not only through writing but also through, like we discussed before, canonical texts, how you read them, how you approach them, etc., etc. Right? And it kind of as a result, the students, especially we are talking about the first generation students, they lose their self-esteem, they lose their confidence. They kind of, because they cannot cope up with this standard. The standard that the department expects of you, because standard equals the quality of the department, right? It equals, whether how high end you are. That is
this
kind of, yeah. That is kind of, yeah.
This constant demoralizing feeling of not being enough, the feeling of being less constantly in a classroom context, it can be debilitating. It can it can debilitate you it can lead to a complete intellectual breakdown, where you think that you have no intellectual capabilities, none whatsoever. So yeah, it's completely. And it's isn't it strange to see how the experiences are very common even across countries, across waters.
Yeah, and the thing is, Nindita, at least in the Sri Lankan context, students are not aware of this, of their position, of their position at the department, because we think like studying English literature is like studying language. No, it's totally different cultural system, value system that you're trying to read, and students therefore think, no, I've reiterated this all the time. They think it's their fault. They think it's they can't write properly according to the standard because it's their fault. They're not well read. They've not read. They don't know how to make references because across text, because it's their fault, right? And and this keeps on happening. It's like a vicious circle, and this is why students try to fashion themselves in ways that they can handle this kind of the space that they're in, and try to have a grasp of its politics. Like we will discuss about how canon, like especially I'm very interested in that, because we have this whole concept or idea of decolonizing the campus,
Yeah.
right? We need to decolonize our pedagogy, our curriculum, and all that. Let's discuss how this would be, beneficial, or how would this happen at an English department's place?
I think these days, anyways, the English departments are opening themselves up, from well, at least in in terms of syllabus, or
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to research opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of trying to structure syllabus, or in terms of research opportunities, they are of course decolonizing a lot. They are including more of vernacular vernacular languages, or translation from vernacular languages, or text from vernacular by authors who have who are bilingual, and one of the language that know is English, and the other is a vernacular language. So their experiences are dual in nature, or or the I mean the research is decolonizing a lot to a great
Yeah.
extent. But yeah, the syllabus still remains to a great extent canonical,
Mm.
anglophile. There's this you still have to read the classics, you still have to read the you still have to read the canons. You still have to begin by you still have to know the history of English
Mm.
language, English
Mm.
literature. You
Mm.
still have to you still have to read theorists
Yeah.
from the West, and and know how to utilize them when you are trying to analyze, criticize, or interpret the text. So yeah, so it's not it's not a it's a road that one has taken, but not walked too far.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anamita will also.
What about
Yeah. 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 Please
what
go
about
ahead.
Sri Lankan departments? What about Sri Lankan departments of English literature? I mean, what is the level of decolonization in their syllabus, or in their research opportunities?
Yeah. So, like if this is my opinion, I'm very skeptical about this gesture of decolonization. Number one, because I mean, I feel the importance of including, a lot of literatures, vernacular literature, and all that. But it could also, could I'm just thinking out loud here. It could also, cater to a particular kind of a class. That is what I think. And in the Sri Lankan context, basically, there is no interdepartmental collaboration. Say, for example,
Oh,
the English department would not want to have this interaction with a singular department or a Tamil department. Like the vernacular. They do in certain extent. Like I remember we had a module called Sinhala and Tamil literature, where it was just like just to read a couple of texts and that's it. And it's this kind of collaboration is not sustainable at all. So where I studied, I guess now the syllabus has been expanded and kind of more kind of bit seems to be a bit inclusive. But I guess from having had exposure to a couple of departments, English departments in Sri Lanka, where we are still at a stage where we are trying to protect, or we are trying to impose, we are trying to stick to a particular standard, trying to promote a certain quality, trying to promote a certain kind of a student, an implied student. So it's not very different from your context, actually, being like you rightly mentioned, being very post-colonial, and like I guess I'm not wrong to say that English departments are mostly like act like a colonial institute, like
yeah, the cultural snobbery, the colonial hangover. Yeah, everyone I think complains about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Amrita, you wanted to talk about the future prospects, the job prospects, the employment, and you were also talking about how some students would love to would switch their fields. would switch their careers, after they get their degree. Like, shall we talk a bit more about that?
Yeah. So I think, yeah, we were looking. I think we wanted to, I mean, as we were talking about the hindrances that these students face at these, institutions, at these departments, and how
Mm.
there are, there are structural problems,
Mm.
that they are facing. So
Mm.
many of them, in fact, tend to leave the department, as the discipline, discipline doesn't seem to promise them
Yeah.
jobs or a career. Okay.
Mm. Mm.
So which is and believe me, that's not the case. That this discipline, especially in Southeast Asian context, in the decolonized or post-colonial context, has several job opportunities. I mean, has several opportunities, in terms of jobs, in terms of starting newer career avenues. Okay. So they're just, in fact, it's just that they are not oriented towards it, or they are not told that what are the possibilities that they have. These first generation students, they're just not told
Mm.
that, what can they do. I mean, the families are another assumption that, this is a degree which will never pay off. Okay. So how the students are, they are, of course, at colleges, or at universities, they're never told, how they can actually, you can, they can actually make a career out of it. I mean, some of, well, to be fair, some of these institutions and, academic spaces are trying to do some work around it, though tokenistic in nature. I remember, some of these places conducting publication workshop, where, where they're told that, so publication is one avenue where you can go to. So some, then another place I remember conducted a screenwriting workshop, where, the students are told that, how they can get into, screenwriting. So yeah, there are some, some efforts, I mean, some efforts being made, some
Yeah.
orientation being made, but then we all know, right? I mean, screenwriting or publication, or at least writing for that matter, writing as a profession is a very difficult profession. Like, you need to, you need to have a lot of luxury to be able to, write throughout the year, and I mean, to be an author, right? So
Mm.
I mean, and gone are those days when authors wanted to, perish themselves, and wait to be posthumously published. Okay. So the job markets, so the job markets also, and to add, the job market at times is unkind to these,
Yeah.
these students. The job market is unkind, where, where if you are a person without the cultural capital, and cultural capital, and somehow you haven't been able to, recover, recover from the loss, or manage to compensate for the loss throughout your course duration, through your course duration.
Mm.
Often, it becomes very difficult to, to seek a job in the market. Often many of them, and there are several context signals that, that gives out, that gives out the fact that, that you still haven't, that you don't have the cultural capital, or you still haven't, gained the cultural capital. Okay.
Yeah.
So and it works in several ways. Like, it works in terms of ethnicity. And this someone to whom I was talking to
Right.
told me that, how a particular, how a colleague of a certain ethnicity was seen as, less credible in the department, in the department, when she voices her opinion at a all teachers meeting. Her,
Mm.
was seen as less credible, just because she was of a certain ethnicity. So, how, if you are not a part of a majoritarian community group, your ethnicity, your religion, your caste, your, often, even gender, as much as we may try to talk about, feminism, often gender also functions in. So,
Mm.
how your ethnicity, your religion, your caste, your class, to a great extent, gender also, all of
Geography.
this factors into,
Yeah.
factors in to to see you as a as a viable option, as a good option for a certain job. So the job market is most certainly cruel, okay, to
Right.
say the least. You have two people, who are who do not have the cultural capital and say just the degree. Often, many of them don't even know the unsaid rules of the market. How to
Mm.
land a job. How to approach for a job. Or for that matter, the how the how the job networking works.
Mm.
Like it's also about networking, right?
Yeah.
So how the job networking works. They don't know about the whole politics of visibility, that they have to visualize themselves to be seen as a potent job seeker, okay.
Mm.
So
Mm.
it's too many things. So yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's not that there aren't jobs, it's just that it's just that it again doesn't favor the people, the students who have degrees, first generation English department, students of English department, with a degree, and still coping to gain the cultural capital.
Yeah.
Sometimes
Yeah.
it's still difficult for them
Yeah.
unless they
Like,
have completely given into the performance.
yeah. I think you remember we discussed this before. Like, some people, they kind of, they are very, how should I say this? They're very happy to say something like, oh, I found the job too stressful, so I just walked away from it.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah, and I don't think it's just the best fit for me. I find my colleague annoying, so I just left my job. So it's kind of this, the ease with which people say that,
Hmm.
like articulate this as a form of having agency for yourself to decide,
Exactly,
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's very common to see many people. Of course, these are people, people who have who have the agency to walk away from jobs because it does not fit their temper, or the
Mm.
or the environment, the professional environment is seems toxic to them, or not professional enough,
Yeah.
or they do not, they see it as oppressive. So how some people have the agency to walk away from it, because it also comes from the fact that they have multiple, they know that they have multiple avenues to seek jobs.
Mm.
you know
Mm.
they
Mm.
also, they know that that they have the cultural capital to actually not to not tie themselves up, or to be in such oppressive
Yeah.
structures.
Yeah.
So yeah, many people I know take pride in the fact that I can, that if they want, they can walk away from this
Yeah.
job,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Not understanding that, firstly, not walking away from the job, or from the from that from the job is not a solution.
Mm.
um, there has to be there not a solution for everyone. Some people
Mm.
just can't afford it, right? It's a financial, people have financial liabilities, they
Mm.
want to stick to job, they want stability, they want financial stability. And
Mm.
often, yes, I know, unfairly often it comes at the cost of being at workplaces which may not be which are not which are not conducive to their growth, okay, or
Mm. Mm.
not healthy for them. But they do not have the agency to walk away. And
Yeah.
this agency to walk away is also a privilege, right? It's
Yeah.
also a it's also a cultural capital, that if not this job, I'll get another job,
Yeah.
okay. So like to know that that to know that you are, you can get another job, is also a cultural capital, right?
Capital.
And
Yeah.
how some people, in fact, it's a financial capital also, to
Also,
know that
also social capital, because they might have a network, right, that they can connect to.
exactly. So it's a
Yeah.
social capital, it's a cultural capital, to know that you can walk away from a job and be unemployed
Mm. Mm.
for a long time,
Mm.
because you have a financial capital, or
Yeah.
something that supports you financially. Or
Yeah.
it's about social capital also, that how you have to socially validate yourself,
Yeah.
through that job.
Mm.
So it's also about that. You can't just, some people just can't walk away from a job, and
Mm.
from a job, even if it does not help them. So yeah, it works in several ways. In fact, this brings as to the question of the whole internship culture also, you know, how so many so many of so many people have access to internship, or can do internship, unpaid internship, primarily only because they have the financial stability or financial backup, which allows them to have have internships after internships, which fills in their CVs and makes their CVs look decorative and fancy, which eventually helps them get multiple jobs. And that's why they could perhaps claim that if not this job, I'll get another job, right? So it's all interconnected.
Yeah. Sure. I also remember we discussed about funding, but I'll come to the question like this. Now, how can we place this, this scenario of, the English departments being very hostile environments, first generation students? How can we tie it up with, the crisis of the humanities that we face right now? How can we approach it, Anindita? We can just, brainstorm.
Yeah,
Yes.
I think we talked about the funding
Yeah.
situation, right? That
Yeah. Yeah.
how there are fewer scholarships,
Yeah.
fellowships and internships, and I don't know, funding bodies, job position, like
Mm.
exposure to, in fact, the global job market, or the academic sphere. So, like, of course, when it comes to funding, this nothing suffers more than the humanities and the
Mm.
social
Mm.
sciences,
Mm.
perhaps. Okay.
Mm.
So in um, I mean, if we are looking at the crisis of funding, it also it has to do with how the discipline is seen, by
Correct.
the state, by the funding bodies, how the discipline is seen as I mean, when you're looking when you're looking at the discipline, or this discipline from a capitalist venture,
Right.
outlook,
Yeah.
you realize that how when you're looking at it from the capitalist outlook, you realize that the capitalist outlook, outlook which wants to make more and more money and profit, of course, that business model does not fit with
Mm.
humanities and social sciences,
Mm. Mm.
because humanities and social sciences are firstly, they never they have this aberration towards making themselves this
Mm.
profiteering
Mm.
discipline. At the same time, they also these disciplines have this have fallen out of the race of seeking more and more funding, because how they're simply seen as this this necessary evils,
Yeah.
they're there in the institution only so that they can they can brush. So you see many of these science primarily science institutions having a small humanities and social sciences department, where they would only where the only purpose is to not teach English literature specifically, but then teach more of functional English,
Mm.
a little bit of cultural studies, a little bit of history, so that so that so it's almost like reducing English the humanities as some kind of hand handsy hand some kind of accessory, something that you just hold on to to accessorize, something not vital to the something not very vital to sustaining the system, something not
Yeah.
very vital to sustaining the state, for that matter.
Yeah. Yeah. I think before ending our discussion, I have like a very interesting thing that we actually forgot to talk about, which is, like English department spaces are like, it kind of promotes all this liberal kind of values, right? So when the first generation students come to departments and they get, all trained, quote unquote, trained in the liberal ideologies, how they connect back to their home, their parents, their upbringing is kind of, is kind of in a crisis. Amindita, shall we also talk about that? If that's okay with you?
Yeah. I think, once you are a part of a liberal arts department, I
Mm,
think, not just English department, I
mm,
would say, but not
mm,
just English literature department, but in general about, I speak for the liberal arts. Once you are a part of liberal arts, I think it becomes difficult. It's like a point of no return. Okay.
yeah.
you, families and, family gatherings, the family as a system becomes, becomes a hostile site, where
Mm,
where you have been newly minted, and you have learned new things,
mm,
things which explains the discomfort that you have felt all your lives, things that puts a label to the discomfort that you have felt all your life.
mm,
And suddenly, the liberal arts gives, helps you find a label for it.
yeah.
So so of course families become, I think engaging with families become difficult,
Yeah.
especially if people are not broad minded, people are not open minded. It's very common. I mean,
Mm,
almost every day we hear students talk about how their how their parents just stop them from back answering to their relatives, because they're tired of tired of a certain relative body shaming them constantly, or a
mm,
student choosing to call out a family member or a relative just because they were tired of the
mm,
toxic culture it was
mm,
breeding for
mm,
themselves and for the coming generation. So yeah, of course families, oh god, like, I think it's, as I said, it's a point of no return once you have
mm,
been to a liberal arts department, and you have been introduced to introduced to all the all the theories and the labels, and you have
mm,
been told to think critically. You have
yeah.
understood how to analyze, how to you have been trained to see things, or
Yeah.
trained to as we say, trained to read between the lines, or trained to so everything is open to interpretation for us, and
Yeah.
it's a never ending game. It's a no
Yeah.
point of no return. It's a never ending game. We are constantly reading and interpreting and criticizing and analyzing even the things that perhaps we shouldn't be.
Yeah.
And at the same time, yes, definitely, family as a side becomes hostile for many. It's a common thing that
Mm,
we I think we listen to such stories from from across places.
mm,
I'm sure that's the case with that's the case in Sri Lanka as well. I mean, in
mm,
in elite universities in India, it's a very common thing, students complaining in class about, or asking teachers that how do they explain this to their parents, or
yeah.
that their parents are resisting them from doing this. How do they explain it to them, or how do they make peace with something that their parents said, or or
Yeah.
their relatives
Mm,
said, or a sibling said. So it's very common. Like,
mm, mm,
uh,
mm, mm.
I don't know how. I mean, people are talking about it. Thankfully,
Yeah.
people are openly. Social media has thankfully helped us. To this. I mean, for all the evils that social media bears, we see many of these. People actually pouring out in classrooms and social media. In mentor mentee groups, or or often in their in their co-curricular activity. So yeah, it pours out a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
discomfort of
Absolutely.
discomfort of being in a
Yeah.
in conservative settings like families, or families, and then negotiating your your newly found affiliations to liberal arts department.
Yeah. We will also finally add something or pitch in a couple of suggestions as to how we could make departments more accessible, more, less hostile, or how should I say, more inclusive. Even that's not the word. Like accepting of the first generation students. Like what kind of as at least as first generation teachers of literature, like you and I, how can we do this? In our classrooms.
uh See, To be honest,
Hmm.
these are like very macro and long term. I mean,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, smaller changes. I mean, there can be micro changes, but
Yeah.
this has to, there has to be a macro change, a long term change, because it's only when there are, bigger structural changes
Mhm.
that, these problems will be, negotiated. Because, just by, because it's not like the institutions or or the English department hasn't been trying to change. We have, I think I mentioned, we have, tutorial system, we have a mentor mentee system, we
Mhm.
have, remedial classes, feedback system. It's not like there aren't systems, or there aren't mechanisms in place, but of course a lot of it lands up being ineffective. So
Mhm.
there comes the question that perhaps these kind of micro changes don't take us a long way.
Mhm.
They don't take us to a great distance. So there has to be macro changes. And yeah, the macro changes will come not just within the department, or from the department, but how the humanities or the liberal arts is
Mhm.
perceived, or how the funding scenario is, for
Mhm.
liberal arts. It has to do with how, the schooling system is, how the schooling system introduces students to liberal arts. It's
Mhm.
also about the cultural and social perception around liberal
Right.
arts. It also has to do with, how cultural capital has to be diluted. It also has to do with how students, it also has to do with, the research done around it.
Right.
So it's a lot. Like, when I was trying to look, in fact, even I tried to look for solution, because for since we spoke, I have also been trying to, learn more about people's, like, since we first spoke, and about this, and we decided that, let's go ahead with this.
Yeah.
I have been listening to people and their accounts, and believe me, so many accounts have poured in. I mean, people have been, there have been multiple, accounts about how they felt less, or how they felt left
Mhm.
out,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
what are the problems, how they critically analyzed it. A lot have come out, but I also kept feeling that, there weren't enough solutions. Because not
Okay.
many of them were offering solutions. Not that I have any grand solution, okay,
Yeah.
but not many of them. Also, I was also looking for solutions. So I thought of, why not, maybe I should look it up. There must be some kind of research done on it, and
Mhm.
turns out
Mhm.
not a lot of research is also done on it, okay,
Yeah.
except this one that I know, who was very generous to speak to me for almost, devote his 2-3 hours, and a huge, you know discuss a lot about, a lot from his own work.
Mhm.
Own work. I couldn't find many people who are actually looking at these questions. Of course, we
Right.
all are talking about it in our classrooms, in our staff rooms, in our peer groups, or
Yeah.
in our, in our WhatsApp groups. So we all are discussing about
Yeah.
it, but
Yeah.
we're not having a very, a very structural discussion about it. And perhaps that's the reason we don't have any,
Right.
we don't have better solutions, or
Right.
we don't have, or also because we are perhaps not, not looking at it from a, in a macro way. Therefore we don't have those macro solutions also. I mean, as
Mhm.
I said, I am, I'll be honest, I don't really know any macro solutions
Mhm.
yet. I mean, I have suggestions, and I have, I have a hint as to, perhaps if this is done. But
Mhm.
yeah, but
Yeah.
I think solution wise, I don't know, do we
Mhm.
have any macro solution? The micro solutions are there, remedial classes, and feedback system for assignments, and assistance, and guidance, and counseling, and
Yeah.
um, um, tutorials, and mentor mentee, and perhaps, so many kind of things.
Mhm.
But this also needs a structural change. So
Right.
how that has to be done, perhaps, I mean, I think that's one of the things that you are trying to do with your your series also, right? You're trying to look at why, who's afraid of humanities, and why, and and what is, what why are people scared of it, why are people scared of humanities, like why do they why are people scared of funding it? What happens if humanities departments are funded? What happens if a researcher gets funding? What happens if libraries are funded? Why? I mean, why are people so scared of people who read,
Mm,
people who critically think? So I
yeah.
think there are too many ways to address it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also think like you and I are largely first generation lit academics now, and I think it's our kind of ethical our responsibility to at least in our personal ways to make students make it more approachable to students at least in the classroom, like the way we use our teaching, the methods that we use, the pedagogy that we use, like at least in those sense we may not be able to do like a huge change, like a systemic change, but at least we could try to use these methods, get them involved in discussions as far as possible, as small steps towards something big. Anindita, thank you
Yeah, yeah.
so much. Yeah, thank you so much for joining with me today. You gave me a lot of strength to talk about this because this is something that I needed to talk for a long time, and it kind of when I met you first, it kind of really connected me with you, like like both of us sharing same experiences and all that. Thank you very much. Do you have any last comments before we wind
No,
up the session?
I'm just happy that we actually decided to talk about this,
Yeah.
and I'm happy that it was it was a cathartic experience to actually talk about personal experiences, at the same time share experiences of so many
Absolutely.
people. I
Absolutely.
mean, it was really it was really heartwarming to see when I asked out, when I was asking around people that this is what we are trying to do,
Yeah.
would like to write. Oh, yeah, almost everyone, each one of them, actually took out time from their busy schedule to write long mails to me, write long messages to me, send voice recordings, as
Mm,
if they wanted to talk about it. And
mm,
all of them were like, please, let's do this, please talk about this, because
yeah.
it's like it's actually a cathartic feeling, because we all, not just we are not just sharing our own experiences or talking about ourselves and thinking out loud, but we are also sharing the experiences of so many people who who just want to put out their experiences out there, and perhaps they also want the same,
Mm,
they want others, the new the new first generation students who are coming into the departments feel less, feel less, less of an outsider. So
mm,
yeah,
mm, mm.
I mean, I should thank you for actually giving me this opportunity to speak for myself and for for them. I think we all are thankful to you too.
Absolutely. It was such pleasure talking to you, Anindita, and talking about this because until now, at least in Sri Lanka, there has not been space to talk about what first generation students undergo, especially in departments like this. And I'm so thankful that you took it upon yourself to talk about this. Anindita, I will just end this with one of the short excerpts of a story. Let me just
Yeah.
read it out. A conscious navigation of stories about my family and upbringing, quote unquote, salvaged me from the scrutiny of the socio-cultural gatekeepers at the English department. My lack of exposure to Western cultural memory projected a certain intellectual deficiency, which I learned to negotiate carefully through affirmative nodding, occasional bouts of laughter, or maintaining complete silence. Most of my friends
Oh, wow.
were socio-politically informed and were vocal about injustice happening to women and marginalized quote-unquote communities, whereas I initially dismissed any political involvement as not my thing. My circle of friends identified me as a timid, innocent, and silent pet. Thank you all for joining with us today. Thank you, Anindita. We will see you in another episode. Until then, we hope you have a good time. Thank you very much.